Hello and thank you for buying Henson's Flying Machines Curtis P40. This kit comes on 5 sheets of laser cut balsa wood. It includes the decals and the covering that you'll need to assemble it. To begin assembling the kit, first refer to the parts list provided and then mark each part in the sheet with a pencil in order of assembly. To assemble this kit you will need a sharp knife, Stanley knife or scalpel like so, a pencil, either cyano glue, super glue or balsa cement, and a nail file or sanding paper. Once you've marked all the sections on the sheet, you can begin removing them from the sheets of balsa. Simply cut along each of the small tabs and remove the sections as needed. The first parts needed to construct the fuselage are parts 1A and 1B, the sides of the fuselage, 2A, the main cross member of the fuselage, and 3A, which is the wing support for the fuselage. Begin by removing these from each of the sheets. Once you've removed part 1A from the sheet, you'll start by fitting part 2A into the slot here. Start from the bottom, sliding the arm in, and then the tab into the top, which should press directly into place. With that in, use the end of one of the balsa sheets to ensure a 90-degree angle to the body, and then glue in place wherever the balsa meets. It's important here to ensure that the arm is fully into the body and up into the fuselage. Allow that to dry properly at 90 degrees before moving on to the next section. The next section being part 3A, which fits further back from this and then presses into the bottom, like so. Again, using the 90-degree angle, allow that to be seated. Make sure that it's perfectly parallel and then glue into place. If you're using balsa cement, drying times will be longer. With part 2A and 3A in place, you'll need fuselage side 1B. Slot this over the already fitted parts and drop it down in exactly the same manner. Don't forget to allow the tabs to guide proper fitment. At any point where you apply pressure, make sure that you support the balsa so that it doesn't strain. Once in place, check that the cross sections are fitted at 90 degrees and then glue in exactly the same way as you did on the first half of the fuselage to the second. Wait for that to dry for a few minutes. The next part to fit is part 4A, which forms the rear of the cockpit. This slides into the 2 tabs here behind the diagonal cross section. Now place those 2 tabs fully down into the slots on the sides of the fuselage and then just gently hold it into place there. As you're later going to curve this with some sanding paper, you'll take out some of the shape. Again, check that it's in at 90 degrees on both sides. Once you're happy with the placement, again, glue into place. With the rear of the cockpit fixed, we're going to now fit the nose section, which is part 5A. As you'll see, the tab that holds the nose shaper is at the top of the aircraft. This is going to go over the tabs at the very front of the aircraft. Now, slot those 2 tab parts on like so, pressing down very gently as they are quite delicate. Holding in on both sides. Once you're happy with it, glue along the inside edge. You're going to want a very strong bond along here as it's going to support the nose in case of any hard landings and also take the power unit or rubber band. Hold until dry. The next part to take into consideration is part 7A. 7A fits further down the fuselage here, like so, into the 2 tabs provided. Hold it in place, gently push the tabs while supporting the balsa from the outside, and allow it to seat well down into the fuselage with the bottom curve protruding slightly. Now, you will see that the fuselage begins to taper slowly towards the backwards. Make sure that both arms of the fuselage are perpendicular to each other, and then glue along the inside. Like so. Next on our list is part 7A, which is the same piece further down the fuselage and again fits into the two tabs on each side. Gently pinch the fuselage together, tapering the tail, and slot them into place. Now it's very important at this stage to make sure that the two arms of the fuselage are angled in the same way backwards. So just roll the fuselage very gently between your fingers until you're satisfied that they are seated in the correct manner. Nudge any corrections. And once you are happy, it makes sense always to lay this over a gridded surface, and then you'll be able to tell that your angles are perpendicular. And then of course glue all the way along the inside so that you have a very solid bond to support your tail. Then hold until dry. The next parts to fit are part 8A, which is the instrument cluster or cockpit dial. This fits into the angled slat just front of the cockpit here, like so. And that can be pressed down into the two slots. And then the sides of the fuselage slightly pinched together just to allow it to sit in there, and then allow it to fall forward like so at an angle. Glue it just on each edge. Like so, there and there, and allow that to set, helping you to pull in the curvature of the fuselage a little bit. Part 9A is the cockpit floor, which we're going to fit now. It has two removable panels in it to reduce weight. I'm going to pop those out now while this dries. And you'll notice that one end is tapered slightly backwards. Now the correct way to fit this is from the underneath of the aircraft, like so. Pop it into place and then just slide it backwards in the fuselage until you feel it pinch tight. And then hold the sides of the fuselage together and glue along the edges. This works as a little supporting brace, or if you are converting to micro RC, it can also house your servos. There you are, you can see how it fits there. The next part to fit is part 10A, which fits at the bottom of the fuselage like so. This will allow you to center the position of the wings correctly. Now, place it like so on the bottom with the slot facing backwards and the two wing tabs towards the front. Align it perfectly flush to the sides of the fuselage, like so, just test that fitment, and then glue all along the edges here, like so. On both sides, make sure that it's got a good joint, as this is going to be the wing support. Also boxes in the bottom of the fuselage and gives it a lot more strength. With the main part of the fuselage complete, it's time to start building the tail. The main tail section is part 11A. Then we will need part 13A and part 12A, which is the small triangle section here. Now, part 12A slots into the lower tab on the tail section. When you're dry fitting this, just check the fitment there. It will be quite tight, but you can slowly plane away the balsa to get a perfect fit where it'll push down as it is. Don't push it in without trial fitting it, or you may split the balsa. The next part is 13A, which is the horizontal tail. That slots into the upper slot of the tail, like so. Now, using your 90-degree edge, make sure that your tail, upright and horizontal, are at exactly 90 degrees to each other. Also ensure that the horizontal is pushed all the way into the vertical so that the flap, or rudder, sorry, will not interfere with any movement of the flaps. Then once you're happy with that, glue along the edges in place, keeping it perfectly at 90 degrees, roll it over and glue part 12A in exactly the same manner. This is going to support the tail as it goes into the fuselage. There we are. Now to fit the assembled tail into the fuselage, what we're going to do is drop it into the tail unit here, like so, resting, and then pull it back slowly until it falls into line with the back of the two tail arms. This is slightly adjustable if you want a slightly longer run to it. And then just pinch the two edges of the tail together until they meet in a similar part of the tail, like so. Now the horizontal unit, part 13A, needs to be down perfectly flush and flat against the two arms of the tail before you glue along that inside edge there on both sides, and then the actual arms of the tail to the main tail unit. Now plenty of glue can be used here on all the little joints around, just to make sure that you've got a nice connection on it. Hold that until it's dry, as there are quite a few bits that need to dry. With the tail in place, we can fit some of the formers onto the fuselage itself. We're going to start building up the nose with parts 14A and B, which are these here. You can see the carrier support in the top. This is going to go in the slot just forward of the instrument panel, and that's going to push down like so. Just make sure that it's aligned the same on each side with a slight adjustment, and then glue into place. Both parts 14A and B are the same, so it's fine. You don't have to worry about getting them mixed up. Like so. Now part 14B or A, whichever order it is, goes into the last remaining slot just here, and squeeze the fuselage together a little bit just as you put it in, and glue it on the inside like so. Hold until dry. Parts 15A and B do exactly the same thing on the underside of the fuselage, pushing down into the tabs, being careful not to break it, slowly squeezing the fuselage sides together until the tabs fit flush. Glue it on the inside. 15B further forward, and again all the way down into the tabs. If they do protrude slightly past the tabs, it's not a big issue, as you can just sand them off slowly with your nail file when you're preparing to cover. And glue those into place. You'll see how we're building up the profile and the shape of it now. Parts 16A, B, C and D are slightly more complicated and built up in layers. Parts 16A and B look like this, and parts 16C and D fit over the top of them like this to give the distinctive window shape of the P40. Layer them over the top like this, and then just make sure that they're aligned on top of each other like so. Glue around the inside edge. All of the corners, making sure that they are aligned and tightly fitting, and then if you need to, you can put a little bit of extra glue just on the outside for a bit of strength. Best way to align it is always just by touch, holding it all the way around, and then gluing on the internal and the external. Let this set and dry for a moment. With these two parts completed, we can now begin to fit them with the 90-degree angle towards the top of the fuselage. Now these fit over parts 4A and 6A, like so. Just lay them on there and then align them as you are happy. Like so. Glue them at the very back here and at the front there will be some slight change in alignment, but that's fine. And then repeat exactly the same on the other side of the fuselage, making sure that they are aligned in the same way, like so. There you go, allow that to dry before moving on. The next part to fit is quite delicate. Part 17A is a small extra thick stringer. Now this goes from the little davit just in front of the cockpit, lays along the top here and just to the front section here. That's going to form the scoop. Now to fit this, you want to start by gluing it towards the rear, just in front of the cockpit there. Next point you're going to glue it in is forward here, one former back of the front, and then finally into the very front. So you'll see there how that's going to form the scoop as the other stringers lay down the side. To begin building up the distinctive nose section, we're going to start with parts 18A and B, moving on to 19A and B, 20A and B, 21A and B, 22A and B, all the way up to 23A, which is the final part of the nose. Now, these pieces jigsaw together quite easy. Put them on a flat surface, slide them together like so, and then just glue along the edge. At this point you need to be really careful though not to glue it to the table. Now just glue those in, keep it moving if you have any doubts at all. There you are, that is 18 put together out of parts A and B. Allow that to dry. Moving on to part 19 and all the way down the run of the nose sections. Keep them in this order so that you're going to know which sections they build up into. Obviously part 18 is the lower section, part 19 lays on top of that, and so on. To begin layering up the sections, lay part 18A flat, then place part 19A B over the top. Now you need to align using that central hole like so. With the Warhawk you'll be able to see the large air scoop underneath. Put a layer of glue across it and then just on the inside where it's going to support it all the way through, align it perfectly using the inner hole. We're going to sand down the outside. Then your next part in exactly the same way, like so. Now you can glue on the inside here once you've got it aligned. Just make sure that the overrun of super glue doesn't go too far down. And then your next section will sit on top of that. Again, keep everything aligned nice and neat. Once this is complete, what we'll do is we'll sand down all of those edges to get those contours really nice and sharp. Section here sits like so. Now you'll notice that we've gone higher than the scoop at the bottom there. The reason for this being is that your nose is going to stand slightly proud. So just adjust that where it needs to sit there till you're confident. Turn it over and now glue on the inside in that section there. Nice good strong bond. 22 over there. Again, centralize it, good curvature, and then glue on the inside. This is the hole through which your rubber unit is going to fit. There's also enough space for you to put a little electric motor in there if you want to. And then finally 23, which fits over that. Like so. Just check your alignment as you go, make sure that everything's fitting nicely. Once you're happy with it, you have a solid wedge of balsa, and that can glue to the front of the aircraft like so. Now align this up to the top of the final curvature and then also to the bottom there as well. I want to make sure that it's perfectly straight upright. Then glue it around the bottom everywhere it comes into contact. Don't overrun too much with your super glue. And then on the inside there as well, glue it for a very strong fitting, because when you sand it, it's going to try and move, and you really don't want that. It's also got to have a very strong nose for any harder landings. There you go. Continuing on with the fuselage, part 24A and B, slot here. Now, if you look at the sides of the fuselage, you'll see a small cutout here. This fits like so, the former going along the edge and pushing down to that bottom section there. Now glue this primarily towards the nose area, and then all the way along this is going to be a strength giving former, and then as you approach the rear you'll see there's a little amount of space there. Now you want to slowly squeeze it in until it fits up flush against the fuselage, and then just glue the tail of that former in place like so. Hold that down and then do exactly the same thing on the other side of the fuselage, fitting into that slot, lying down nice and flush. Then starting at the front, glue all the way along. And then of course taper that end just by hand all the way along and glue into place. That's going to give the lovely curved shape to the P40. Parts 25A and B, as you can see, have this cut out manifold on it. These are the upper sections here, and they're going to fit like so just into the top slots there. Now you'll notice there is a line here just below the manifold. The reason for that is when you're covering, it's easier to do it without the manifold, so you can just run a blade along and just trim those off for covering, paint them and glue them back on afterwards. As you can see, that's clipped in quite solidly, so I'm going to glue that at the front on the manifold and then all the way back, tapering it slowly and just attaching it to the fuselage at that rear section there. And exactly the same on the opposite side of the fuselage. A little wiggle helps it to get into those tab slots, and then properly glued in place all the way along. Hold that until it sets. Setting the fuselage aside for now, we can start assembling the wing area. To build the first wing you'll need part 26A, the leading edge, and 27A, the trailing edge. Attached to this but not numbered are the ailerons and flaps. To assemble the wing section, simply on a flat surface push the two jigsaw halves together until they align. Now glue the outside edges on the top, making sure that the glue doesn't seep through, and glue to the surface underneath. Glue all of the jigsaw areas thoroughly. Hold until dry. I'm moving it slightly to stop it from sticking to the bottom in case any glue travels through. There are several different types of wing ribs. The first and most important is the outer wing rib, which has the two circular holes in it here. Place this towards the outer wing tip at this end here into the slot provided. Press it down simply like so and align it towards the front edge. Glue this in place at the front and rear, and then glue it solidly all the way along to create a nice solid wingtip finish. The next you want to fit in is this wing rib here, shaped with 5 holes of irregular sizes in it. Now This particular wing rib goes on the inside edge and is the longest of the wing ribs there. Place it into this hole here, lined on the inner wing. Go it all the way along, creating a nice solid bond. The next type of wing rib to fit has two holes and fits in the smaller slots here. Press these into place, into the slots, and then align them so that they do not go past the leading edge. Glue these in place at the front and rear. The next also has two holes in it and is identical to the previous. Fit this in exactly the same way, pressing it into the two holes, like so, and gluing it front and rear. The odd one out is this wing rib that has an oblong hole and two round holes. This fits into the next one along and is an odd size wing rib. Push that like so down into the slots for a nice firm fit, and then glue front and rear. The remaining three wing ribs, as you'll see, have two oblong holes and one circular one. Press these into the slots remaining on the wing, like so. Glue these front and rear, ensuring a nice fit. With those in place, you can now look at fitting the ailerons and flaps. These can simply be glued directly to the wing ribs and trailing edge of the wing and fit in like so. Now, if you are going to be converting this to micro RC control, then the option is there to use threaded hinges or paper hinges by using these semi-cut out holes here. As I'm not doing it with this one, I'm just going to glue it directly to the wing ribs wherever they meet, and then slightly on the joints. Moving along, repeating the process and making it into a nice solid wing section. Again, these are only printed separately in order to give you additional options. There you are. Now, with the first wing in place, it is absolutely crucial to build the second wing as a mirror image. Do this by laying all of the wing areas down as a complete mirror so that you have both a port and a starboard wing together, which should look like this. Now that you have both port and starboard wings together, you can fit the wingtip shapes, which are these parts here. There are 4 of them included in this kit, and they are named 32A through D. Now these should be fitted on similar angles on both sides. Plan where you want to glue them in, and then simply glue them on the wing edge, like so, making sure that both sides are mirrored and that the shape makes sense to the final design you're trying to do. These will need a slight trim on the end, which can be done by sanding or just trimming with a blade. Again, you want to obtain a nice smooth edge. The reason for these is to curve the covering material down into the wingtip and give you a nice spillage of air. With the wings in place, we can now attach them to the fuselage. This is done by simply laying the wing against the flat of the fuselage where the fuselage curves downwards, and then leaning the wing upwards to come into contact with the wing support. This will look like so from underneath. And what we're going to do is, just putting a little pressure on to get the dihedral right, we're going to glue along the inside edge and to the wing support. You need a very good strong bond here, so don't be afraid to use plenty of glue and solidly stick it down all the way along. Hold that until dry. Fitting the opposite wing is done in exactly the same way. Align it to be a mirror attached in the same place, like so. Now you'll notice that there is quite a strong dihedral on this model, which helps it with flight. And it's all aligned upright, seated as it needs to be, and flush up against the side of the fuselage. And again, in a very good glued surface all the way along and to that wing support. Like so. With the wings in place, we can start fitting the stringers on, which are going to give the shapes to the fuselage. Now there are several different sizes of strings. Use the ones most suited to the area you are trying to fill in. These smaller stringers are for the nose section. Now we're going to use these by, first of all, aligning it to the very front of the nose, like so. Gluing it in place at that front, and then moving down the nose as we go, gluing in place, and then stopping the final one just in front of the cockpit instrument panel. You see how that fits into the tabs on the top of each slot. As you go along, when you reach the instrument panel, which is pushing it upwards, just trim the stringer and then bend where it should fit. Do this on both sides for the nose, and you should get the shape you desire. Note here that I'm trimming the stringer away in front of the cockpit instrument panel. That's because we have a small area of windscreen that we're going to fit there, just to give some profile and shape to the cockpit area. The stringers will have a darker side and a lighter side. I prefer to have the darker side outwards as it shows off the airframe. If you're building for scale shape, it's probably better to use the lighter side. That will hide more of the stringer. It depends very much on how much visibility you want for the stringers themselves. And once that's all done, we're going to run a little bit of sandpaper over it and just dress it up a little bit. For building up the tail section, we'll need some of the longer strings here, of which two can be found. Start from the tail here and lay these on top of the tail fuselage stringer sections here. Now, you want it as close to the tail as possible so that it will almost touch laid into the very top of each of the fuselage cross members. Now glue it to the first of the fuselage cross members, and once that's dry, move along, pushing it down into the tab slots, following the contours as you go. It might look a little bit strange to begin with, but it will give the final desired shape. And then trim at the firewall behind the cockpit, which is part 4A and that will leave you with an open cockpit section. Now the lower part of the fuselage requires a stringer that goes from just behind the window here and tucks in underneath that window, going backwards towards the tail section there. It's a little hard to see. That should do it for you. Now, hold it in place, tucked into the slot underneath the window, and glue it from underneath the window, and moving backwards towards the tail. Now repeat everything on the other side with exactly the same method. Starting from the tail, make sure that these are the same length. And then up to the rear of the cockpit, part 4A. And of course, trim that away and find a small offcut to insert in the lower section underneath the window, trailing backwards. These strings are fairly delicate and can be cracked by hand if you want to. Don't forget you can also cut extra stringers from the edges of the sheets provided. Stringers are quite commonly broken during a hard landing or a crash, or even during mishandling of the aircraft itself. But that is the top of the fuselage come together. Now we can turn the aircraft over and work on the bottom a little bit. Now the main part of the bottom is the longest stringer, which runs from the tail all the way forward to this point here. Now we're going to start at the tail, just in front of the tail wheel, and I'm going to glue this into that slot just there, and then into the next one forward, and forward again, running with the contour at the center line. Now you'll notice this tab here on part 10A. I'm going to just trim that stringer so that it slots directly into this tab here. Now this might need a little persuasion, a little extra trimming, like so, and then a nice smooth fit. Like so, that's going to give the fuselage that bulky underneath look to it. Now, for these forward stringers, we're going to start from the very tip of the nose, like so. We're going to lay our first stringer in there, and we're actually going to glue it into that bottom of the nose scoop there, with it bent as far back as possible. And then we're going to start bending it slowly backwards, being very careful not to snap it. Like so. Now, this center hole on part 10A is the final destination. What we're going to do is just saw away at that stringer until we can dock it straight into that hole there, and then glue it in place. This gives a really nice curved bottom to the fuselage. You'll be able to see that there, and a very distinct shape of the P40. Continuing on with the underside, we have what is possibly the most delicate part of the entire build, which starts from the nose on the side areas. Now we're going to glue it into that front tip again, and then very carefully we're going to bend this stringer backwards through the first slot and the second slot, holding it in place as much as possible, and then into the parallel side cutaway here. I'm going to trim that stringer, careful not to crack the part that it's receiving into, and then we're going to press it down with a fingernail just into there and just glue it very carefully in place. And then we can continue on the opposing side. Really do have to stress that a lot of delicate operation is needed with this, and be sure to take it steady, allow it to glue in place before you try and move on. And then dry fit and glue. You'll see now that power bulge on the bottom of the aircraft. With all of the fuselage strings in place, the only thing that remains is to fit the main wing spar. Now lay this into the top of the inlet one, slide it all the way down, and then you'll see here that the stringers begin on a new level. So what we're going to do is glue that up to the top of the wing ribs, trying to balance it as much as possible, because this is going to affect the covering and the appearance of the aircraft and also the strength of the wing. So it's nice to get a nice flat finish there. Just allow it to warp ever so slightly as it goes in there, because we're now going to trim away just this last part here. As you can see, where it meets that wing rib there, we're just going to press down and very carefully just saw away until that wing rib breaks, and then we're going to glue it to that wing rib there, completely flush, and then in with the remaining piece of the wing rib, like so, all the way to the end, pushed up, again, up to the top, and then glued along. And then we can just trim this small part here to fit flush. Now, if you plan on flying this aircraft with micro RC, you can put a little jig in the corner there just to give it a little extra strength, but for free flight you should have plenty of strength in there. Now I'll repeat the same on the other side, and then we can start fitting the control surfaces. Now you can see the airframe is pretty much complete apart from the control surfaces and details. The control surfaces are the rudder, part 29A, and the to tail control surfaces 29A and B. Now, these fit very simply if you're building for free flight. Simply glue them, butt glue them on. If you are building for control, you can use threaded hinges reinforced through the drilled holes. I'm going to glue it on as I'm building this for display. I'm just going to run glue all along that edge there and then attach the rudder directly, like so. To attach the tail control surfaces, use exactly the same method. Simply glue all along the edge and then butt glue it in place. You can of course do this after covering if you want to adjust these as trim. These are a very useful way to adjust pitch during flight. There we go. It's starting to look a lot like a P40 Warhawk now. With the airframe pretty much complete, it's time to move on to some of the details. The landing gear provided fits the style of the model accurately, and if you flip it over, you'll see here the connection points. Now, these are these little kidneys which fit like so. Now, laying that down like that will allow you to glue it vertical before you glue it to the actual model itself. Right, so this kit also comes with the prepared wheels, which you will sand and shape and then fit onto the undercarriage in place. Now, it's recommended that if you are flying this model, don't build the landing gear on, as it's likely to snap off during any heavy landings. With the landing gear complete, place it over the outlined shapes and then glue it very well aligned, and the landing gear will add the shape. If you are using a flying model, you can still put these little kidney shapes on just to give that bit of profile to the wing there. Like so. You can also sand them and round them off. Now, the aircraft will now sit on its three legs, and you can put the wheels on there. There are included in the kits two small braces that lead backwards from the undercarriage if needed. There are also 6 little machine gun stubs that can be placed in these wing areas here, and the cockpit sections. Now, the cockpit section 33A and B, you can include as many as you like. I'm only going to include one so as not to overcrowd it. Now, make sure that the alignment on this is spot on and perfectly vertical. There you go. That will give you the desired shape. And finally, 33C, which is the front of the cockpit, fits directly into the top of 8A, which is the instrument dash panel, like so. To use a little bit of glue on there. Angle it slightly backwards to give it the desired shape. In addition to this, there is of course the rubber motor, which generally is fitted here behind the last fuselage former using the matchstick included in the kit. The rubber passes through the middle and the cotter pin through the nose here into your propeller, and then of course your 3D printed propeller boss, which is included in the kit. This kit comes with a variety of decals included in it, such as the Flying Tigers, the RAF Tomahawk colours, the USAF Early and Later War colours. Thank you very much for buying Henson's flying machines, and we hope you enjoy your kit.